was a revolution sparked by an act of desperation, born out of decades of living under an oppressive regime. Tunisia's uprising began when this man, Mohamed Bouazizi, set himself on fire after authorities confiscated his vegetable stand. His death led to mass protests and the resignation of President Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali, who had ruled for more than 20 years. The winds of change spread across North Africa and the Middle East in what was to become the Arab Spring. Some revolutions turned into civil war. But Tunisia seems to have achieved what other Arab states have not, and transitioned into a, so far, stable democracy. Tunisia has become the poster child for the Arab Spring. Its Jasmine Revolution led to a new constitution enshrining women's rights and religious freedom. Today, Tunisians have media freedom, the ability to protest and openly criticise their leaders. But its stability has been threatened. In 2015, Tunisia was the target of 2 deadly terror attacks, which scared away tourists, taking its toll on Tunisia's economy. While it's hailed as the Arab Spring success story, many Tunisians feel the revolution hasn't achieved all that was hoped.
Nothing has changed since the revolution. The only thing that has changed is the political system.
They haven't had a serious will to conduct reforms. The demands of the people have been forgotten.
Many Tunisians fear their country has stopped moving forward. Last month, the parliament passed a controversial reconciliation bill, granting amnesty to hundreds of officials who carried out atrocities under the Ben Ali regime. And local government elections, meant to be held in March, have been postponed for a 4th time due to concerns about the independence of the Electoral Commission. Is Tunisia's transition still on the right path, or are its democratic hopes in danger of being lost? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, I'm joined now by Rached Ghannouchi, the co-founder of Ennahda Party, and a symbol of, I guess, the marriage of political Islam and democracy. Sheikh, welcome to the Newsmakers. So many people say Islam and democracy can't mix. Don't trust those Islamists. They only want to use democracy as a ladder to get power, and then they're going to kick it away when they get to the top. Tell me why Tunisia has been different and has been a model over the past few years.
In the name of God, and all blessings be to Muhammad the Messenger. Tunis was honoured that it sparked the candle of the Arab Spring, and it also had the honour of keeping the torch burning while the torch was drowning in darkness in other places, until they are going to be covered again by God's will. Tunisia was different from others for many reasons. One of them was that Tunisia was a homogeneous society, one language, one race, one religion, while in other countries the social status is complex. They have religious sects, different races and tribes that made the equation of change very difficult. That does not mean that those countries will never gain democracy. I am completely convinced that in 2011 the Arab world entered the era of democratic change. How long it takes for this change to come is different from place to place according to the complexity of the situation, and also according to the ability of elites to reach a consensus among themselves instead of elimination, conflict and fighting. We see that Tunisians succeeded in carrying out a peaceful revolution which toppled the dictator, and secondly, their elites reached a consensus and found ways to solve their problems through dialogue, far away from violence and exclusion. The Islamic movement of Ennahda played a great role as it made concessions concerning the constitution and even stepped down from power to leave Tunisia far from bloodshed and keep the torch of freedom lit for Tunisia. This is what took place.
So we see the country is not without problems. So you have tension between Ennahda and Nida Tunis. We have economic issues. That's normal, but it's a healthy democracy. But something that got people really angry recently was a law that came in place that brought amnesty to those who did any corrupt dealings during the Ben Ali regime. And the people feel that they have peace now, but there's no justice, because if people were criminals and crooks in the past, they can get away with it. I wonder, what do you think about that?
What distinguished the Tunisian revolution was that no revenge was practiced, and the revolution did not divide people into pro and anti-revolutionaries. Some were brought by the revolution, and others before the revolution. But we said all those who accept the constitution of the revolution will be a good Tunisian citizen and be able to occupy any post in the government. But if there are some crimes, there is an independent judiciary to solve these issues. But we declined a draft law to eliminate all those who worked for Ali for 5 or 10 years from the political theatre. We declined that law because it would divide society in Tunisia. There were similar laws in Libya calling for political isolation that divided society. In Iraq, the de-Ba'athization laid the foundations for the civil war. And we in Tunisia distanced ourselves from the process of exclusion and alienation of others. We ended Ben Ali's regime, but we don't want to practice that type of alienation. We followed 2 examples. The first is that of the Prophet Muhammad. When he entered Mecca, he did not practice revenge on those who fought him and his followers for 23 years, tortured him and his relatives and friends. Instead, he said to them, "Go, you are free." Islam was preserved and spread around the world because of the amnesty that the Prophet issued on the day he conquered Mecca. Because those who were freed were those who delivered Islam to North Africa and to Spain. So Islam taught us to express forgiveness. The other model is a civilian model, a new model of Nelson Mandela. When he defeated the apartheid regime, he did not practice murder or revenge, but he practiced forgiveness and amnesty and united South African society, both white and black.
So my final question to you. Tunisia is a stable democracy. It did not plunge into chaos. It did not plunge into war. We look at places like Syria, we look at places like Libya, we look at places like parts of Iraq. We have the emergence of Daesh, and the situation is a big mess. And when we identify some of those fighters, we find that a great number of them come from Tunisia. Does it break your heart that so many young Tunisians go and join Daesh? And tell me, why is it happening?
Indeed, there are many young men from Tunisia who joined violent groups. Those who are not from the crown of the revolution. They were not brought up at the age of the revolution, but they were the product of the dictatorial regime of Ben Ali. Ben Ali closed all the doors of religion and any form of Islamic teachings. So those young men grew up in the absence of any moderate Islamic movements. They were attracted by the internet and other satellite channels, which were the means through which they were recruited by violent groups. Their numbers are not increasing, but are diminishing, because the moment you find in any place there is freedom, you will find violence diminishing and stagnating. There are many social reasons, of course, that have led to this. Many of the fighters grew up in poor neighborhoods. The revolution has still not reached its goal of social justice and providing jobs for people, but there is no future for terrorism in Tunisia, as the Tunisians who made the revolution will not carry out counter-revolutions. Our revolution was a peaceful revolution, and violent groups in Tunisia make up a tiny fraction in society and will never be able to occupy land, but are doing what they do in London, Paris and New York. Individuals from these groups can carry out attacks, but they will never be able to convince the Tunisian people that they have a project or rights. So terrorism is an irregular phenomenon, and there is no future for it. It is the exception, not the rule. It is a remnant of the dictatorship and of the social reform that has not been reached by the revolution, which we will, by the will of God. And now I'm going to say that those who admire the Tunisian model of democratic change should recognize that the success of democracy in Tunisia was a success for the entire Arab and Muslim world. And those who are so careful to distance violence and support democracy have to support this model in Tunisia, because this model gains so many benefits in the political sphere and good constitutional organizations. But we still find some difficulties and weaknesses in social and economic aspects. projects. So those who desire to preserve democracy have to support it by investing in the Tunisian economy, so that the Tunisian project of democratic change can stand on 2 feet, the one being freedom and democracy, and the other being social justice.
Sheikh Rached Ghannouchi, it's been a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's broaden this out now to Libya and other countries in the region. I'm joined now by Tariq Yusuf, the director of the Brookings Center in Doha. Tariq, good to have you on the Newsmakers. So we heard from Sheikh Rached Ghannouchi talking about the successes of Tunisia. Tell me why, now that we have the privilege of hindsight and we can look at the past almost 7 years in the way that we can, historically, why some countries went the Tunisia way, or one country rather, where it embraced a kind of chaotic, messy, healthy democracy, but others were plunged into the pits of hell. Tell me why.
I think there are a number of reasons, obviously, for that. The first and foremost is what Sheikh Rached himself had alluded to, namely that Tunisia's revolution was largely a peaceful political transition, at least initially, compared to Libya, Syria, or Yemen, where you had a fight over who would rule, over toppling the former regime. This became violent. This complicated the political transition that was meant to start. Tunisia also, as was mentioned, benefited from having a much more educated population, largely intact and strong political institutions, and a reservoir of historical experience that allowed it essentially to pick up the pieces and progress with the transition. Contrast that with Libya, where you had virtually no institutions, very little prior experience, no civil society. I would add to that, finally, in the case of Tunisia, Tunisia has very little geopolitical significance. It doesn't have any oil. It doesn't sit at the crossroads of countries that either are unstable or feel vulnerable. Libya has oil, which proved to be, at least during this revolution, much more of a curse than a blessing. It's a magnet for external intervention, for external focus, and our neighbors, borders with our neighbors being very porous, essentially was an invitation for neighbors to intervene, even after Gaddafi had been toppled, to try to influence the game on the ground. So Tunisia in many ways provides an ideal case scenario for how a political transition can progress initially and be given a chance of succeeding, whereas in Libya, Syria, and Yemen, combination of regional interventions, little prior experience, and an uneducated elite, or absence of an educated members of the political elite, proved to be a huge drag on even getting past the first obstacle.
I don't want to miss the opportunity of getting a higher resolution take on Libya from you. So 2 rival governments right now, Siraj, Haftar, shored up by different international players, pockets of chaos throughout the country, Daesh swimming around in the gaps. Total mess. Is there any hope?
I think there is hope. One of the big lessons from the 2015 political agreement that was backed by the UN that brought Siraj was that not only do you have to get the buy-in from political factions inside the country for a political settlement to take hold and for the political transition to resume on peaceful terms, you have to get regional powers that have their proxies inside the country to back off, or at least to support that political transition. That did not happen between 2015 and 2017. If anything, world powers paid lip service to the political agreement, but regional actors continued to intervene and undermined, as a result, with time, the stability, the legitimacy, and the viability of the very UN legitimate, internationally backed process. So will things change as the new UN envoy brokers a new political agreement or amends the existing political agreement to bring more actors within its umbrella? I would say for many of us, the litmus test is, are regional neighbors of Libya on board? Are they willing to back this political transition?
When people say Libyans need a strong man to unite the tribes, to have them under an umbrella that might be a harsh umbrella, but a strong man nonetheless. They need someone like Haftar. He can't be soft. He needs to be ruthless. When you hear that, how does it make you feel?
Well, Gaddafi was a strong man. Saddam Hussein was a strong man. Ben Ali was a strong man. They created a modicum of stability and security within, but enough weaknesses, fault lines, fractures and distortions and contradictions within these systems, and ultimately their repression and their brutality provided the seeds for the revolution. I think a model built around a strong man who somehow has the wisdom and foresight to manage society and an economy in the 21st century by the will of his henchmen, or by the power of his populist appeal, is long gone. I think it might be a recipe for some short-term gains, but ultimately within it, it is a fragile model. It's a failed model. It's been tried and tested. And I don't think a decade from now, even in the countries where it seems to be working at present, it will prove to be durable. Think back at 2010, 2011, right before the revolutions in the Arab world. One of the uncontested assumptions that everybody believed in was Arab authoritarian regimes were durable.
Right.
They were here to stay, and there is no substitute for them in sight. And yet, at a moment's notice, they proved to be incredibly fragile, and they collapsed when not supported, buffeted by external forces that came to their aid in some cases.
Tariq Yusuf, great pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Amir.